talk
Yep.
here. Yeah, that, there. Oh, let me get a pen.
Is someone gonna be sitting in the middle here?
No.
Okay, I'm gonna probably sit here so that I can
Okay, yeah.
stream this.
Okay.
You guys can
Totally
do
that.
your
Okay. All right, tell me when you're ready to go.
thing. Yep.
Let's step back
Just
here.
gonna press this record button.
This way?
Or how about just handle to sit here and then I can shoot over here.
Okay.
Let's do that so you guys can share the questions.
Okay.
and everything.
Hi, thank you so much for coming to our event tonight. My name is Hannah. I'm the Vice President of Turning Point USA. The Right Way Forward, our event, is a debate about the way the American right wing should proceed in this era of history. Increasingly, the right wing, especially the up-and-coming younger generation, is being split into two camps, libertarian and America First paleoconservative. Libertarians have a central belief of limited government control in every aspect of life, social and economic, emphasizing individual liberty and freedom. America First politics revolves around nationalism, strengthening the American population, America's borders, and restoring Christian ethics to American policy. Now to introduce our guest speakers. Austin Petersen from Missouri is our libertarian representative. He is the host of the Wake Up America show. In 2016, Petersen ran for the United States presidency with the Libertarian Party. Shekinah Hollingsworth, representing the America First position, is from Harford County, Maryland. She ran for state delegate in 2022 and was heavily involved in the Trump campaign in 2016 in Iowa. Each debater will be given 5 minutes to briefly introduce their perspective on American politics and worldview, and briefly introduce their opinions on the 5 topics we are discussing. The topics we are debating include federal limits on abortion, separation of church and state, and what it means, marijuana legalization, corporate vaccine mandates, and defederalization/succession. These topics were selected because we suspect that the debaters, or the factions they represent, will disagree with each other to at least some extent. Each debater will be given 1 minute to make an opening statement about each topic, and then both will be given 7 minutes to hash it out. Without further ado,
Ladies first.
So I'm Shekinah Hollingsworth. I ran for House of Delegates in 2022 as an America First conservative. And I think more so than the problems that we're seeing throughout the country with politics as a whole, I think the degeneration of the Republican Party specifically is due to too much freedom and too much of the libertarian ideology kind of seeping its way into a party that's supposed to be distinct from leftism and that's supposed to be distinct from liberalism. The opposite of liberalism is supposed to be conservatism, supporting Christian values, protecting family values, and increasingly we're seeing the Republican Party move toward the left and move toward an ideology that it was never supposed to be representative of to begin with.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Austin Petersen. Thank you very much for coming tonight. I hope our friends that are in the back might consider sitting down for a little bit, just because I know whenever I stand for too long, my blood starts to rush up to my head. So hope you guys will join us. You'll enjoy the debate. That people came here with an open mind and an open heart tonight, and that if you came here hoping one side was going to win, that you might leave here tonight saying, oh, actually, I learned something from the other side, and maybe even change your mind about a few things. That's one of the most difficult things to do, is to change your mind. Very few people change their minds, and scientists think that they have figured out why. The part of the brain that lights up whenever we are being attacked is the exact same part of the brain that lights up whenever you are having your most deeply held beliefs questioned. So I'll ask you tonight that if you feel that little tickle in your brain tonight, it feels like you're being physically attacked, you feel that fight or flight going in from some of the things that I say, that you'll try and relax and allow reason and logic, which is sometimes counterintuitive, to prevail tonight. A libertarian is someone who believes in the primacy of the individual, economic freedom, and personal liberty. That means that you own your life, you own your body, and you should be able to do it with your life and your body as you please, provided that you harm no one else. Libertarianism is the ideology of the founding fathers. It is the ideology of Thomas Jefferson. It is the ideology of James Madison, the ideology of Frederick Douglass. It is the ideology of Thomas Paine and Patrick Henry, and it is the ideology that I share as well. Now tonight, I want to say thank you, first of all, to Turning Point Towson for hosting this debate. Frequently, ideologies like libertarianism or Groyper authoritarianism, if that's what you would call it, are marginalized by the mainstream Republican Party. Shekinah was partially correct in what she said earlier about libertarianism, with the mistake that the idea that there's been too much freedom in the United States is a little bit of a joke to most of us, or that our problems might be caused by too much freedom with a massive government and a $32 trillion debt is the example of what you get with libertarianism. I think is a bit of a joke. I'm looking forward to providing a contrast tonight to this form of authoritarianism, to talk about what I believe is pure liberty, and why I think that libertarianism, small L libertarianism, is something that would put America and the right on the correct path. With the unbelievable tyranny that was shown in the last 2.5 years during the COVID-19 panic, how could you not have watched your neighbors' churches being shut down? How could you not have seen the mandates of people losing their jobs, people who are being fired from the military based on faulty science and the belief in one man's authority? Trust the science, and I am the science, one man said. Libertarianism means decentralization. It means that you decide what medical decisions are made for your life and for your body, not some far-off capital or the National Institute of Health. It's true that I believe in America first as well, but I actually believe that I am the true America first representative here tonight on this stage. And what does it mean to be America first? That means that our national interests should not be subject to foreign government or to foreign super institutions like the UN, the World Health Organization, and especially not the World Economic Forum with people like Klaus Schwab. And what is it that makes America special, though? What is it really that makes us unique? I'll ask you. Well, my belief is that what makes America unique is that America is free, and that we believe in individual liberty, alone in the world, believing in individual liberty. And I believe that America is a force for good in the world. Can your generation say the same? A Consult poll showed that only 16% of Generation Z are proud to be Americans. And I'll ask you tonight not to follow in their lead and let the United States become like Europe. Don't let Tory-style European populism dressed up as conservatism infect our cowboy republicanism. America is about God, guns, gold, and girls, not king and country. And speaking of kings, last night in our conversation, my opponent waxed poetic about how America should be more like Europe. How is that America first? Right? Europe sucks. Europe is cringe. All my homies hate Europe. All right? That's why all of our ancestors left Europe of their own will, except for 50% of Shekinahs. America is unique because America is free. Free men own guns. Slaves do not. I stand here tonight representing what I believe to be the best definition of America first. I stand for economic freedom and personal liberty, and I look forward to the debate. Thank you very much, and let's kick some ass.
So our first topic for today is on abortion. With the recent overturning of Roe versus Wade, many states have started to enact laws that will further limit or outlaw abortion. Many pro-life conservatives have taken the stance that abortion is murder, and we should strive for a nationwide ban. Others contend that it should be left to the states, and that the states should be able to consider their own laws for their constituents. In a post-Roe versus Wade nation, how do each of you think we should proceed?
1 minute.
Well, I think first and foremost that the role of government, the bare minimum of the role of government, is to protect the life and the prosperity of the people that live in it. And that starts with the unborn. And there's a plethora of scientific information, of course, outside of religious beliefs as well. There's plenty of information to confirm that life begins at conception. and that the feminist lobby, the liberal lobby, and certainly libertarians, there's a wide spectrum within the libertarian ideology that doesn't constitute that life begins at conception. And when you have such an inconsistent ideology within a certain sect of a political movement,
10 seconds.
How can you be able to govern the rest of the country when there's not a consistent ideological view on any one given topic? So I don't prescribe how any kind of libertarian ideology pertaining to abortion or anything else could be simply enacted throughout the country.
All right, and you, Mr. Austin Petersen.
Thank you very much. It is true that libertarians are conflicted, and this is one of those issues that I actually changed my mind about as a young man while I was working through this. I used to be, when I was a younger man, more pro-choice. I'm not religious, but I found myself changing my mind as the years went by based on the scientific evidence of what determines when a life begins. And the right to life is a fundamental right. If you believe in rights at all, then you might recognize the phrase life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The first right that's mentioned there is life. And a heartbeat begins as early as 22 days past the point of conception. If the fetus is a human being, and I believe that it absolutely is, then it deserves the
10
same
seconds.
rights as the rest of us to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We must protect life, because without life, there is no liberty.
All right, and now you may into rebuttals and getting at each other's positions.
Well, you call yourself an authoritarian Shekinah, so I mean, if authoritarianism really is able to discard life at will, where does your concept like an intrinsic value of life come from? I mean, most authoritarians say that life really has no value, that the state itself, the collective, is more important than any one life. So how can you value life when you value authority much more?
Well, I would disagree that that authoritarians or really conservatives would even prescribe that we care about the collective as far as the nation is concerned. Born, if our people's lives aren't being protected at the moment of conception, how can we carry out the rest of the protection of their rights thereafter? And when we're talking about capital punishment and being able to delegate what kind of penalties go with what kind of crime, these are charges being levied against grown adults with reason, just as you suggested earlier. Human beings with reason and logic are able to think through these things. Charged with capital offenses, they put themselves in danger, they put other people's lives in danger with no regard.
Only an authoritarian could say on one hand that the government is so competent and so capable and so perfect that it can be entrusted with the power over life and death in the case of the death penalty, but yet so incompetent when it comes to funding Ukraine or foreign policy, so completely incompetent when it comes to our infrastructure in places like East Palestine, where the decision was made and allowed by our Environmental Protection Agency to release toxic chemicals into the air. Oh yes, the government is completely bankrupt, morally, intellectually bankrupt. But in the case where it can kill you, yes, then we trust government. That's when we know the government won't make a mistake. So I guess my question is when it comes to someone's life, how much are you willing to allow for the government to make a mistake? I mean, how many innocent people are you okay with the government killing in order to go after the guilty?
Okay, I will let you answer that question, Shekinah, but I want to remind the debaters that the topic is not about authoritarianism and as it relates to the pro-life stance, but on federal policy on abortion. Should the government have the power to outlaw abortion in all states? Is that something that pro-life people should strive for?
It's a question of federalism versus
yes.
The federal policy, right? So I guess the question should be between us is whether or not you believe in a concept of federalism, whether there should be a one size fits all federal policy on this one, or if you believe that as Roe versus Wade was overturned, sending it back to the states, that was the correct decision by the Supreme Court. Was the Supreme Court decision correct?
Well, firstly, I want to rebut that only a libertarian could argue that centralized government is the biggest evil and they're so incompetent that they can't govern, but somehow these one-party state legislatures are able to make the right decisions. Just like in the state of Maryland, we have an entirely Democratic, super Democratic legislature right now who they don't have any regard for innocent life. They don't have any regard for really any rights that pertain to us fully exercising the rights that are God-given to us.
So the Supreme Court decision was incorrectly decided. It should be a federal policy.
No, the Supreme Court decision was a correct decision because ultimately it was brought to them to make that decision to begin with. They're the law of the land, and decisions should be able to go to the Supreme Court so that they can deliberate and make decisions based on facts and evidence that are presented to them at the time.
So the
And
Supreme
fact of
Court
the matter
should have
is-
sent the matter back to the states as it did.
The fact of the matter is, the key word here is innocent. Babies in the womb are innocent. They haven't been charged with any crimes. They haven't been even allowed the opportunity to be a victim of any crime or anything like that. And the role of the state, once again, is to protect human life.
Okay, I would like to remind the debaters that this is not about what the Supreme Court decision means. It is pretty evident that it means that it can go back to the states as it was before Roe v. Wade. But is this something that the right-wing people should strive for in federalizing abortion bans?
So
Yeah,
very clearly that it's obvious that murder is a state issue, and it always has been. There are only two federal laws when we first started out with this that were crimes, and that was, one was treason, and the other one was debasement of the currency, for which the punishment should be death. And if there should be punished for anything, maybe that should be it. But no, I think that murder, being a state issue, should remain a state issue.
I think that being someone who is right-wing, who is thoroughly conservative, should be using these systems of government to help shape culture by legislation. And that's the way that we've been doing things for hundreds of years, and that's the way that we should continue to push the needle forward. And it wasn't until we started getting more libertarian-minded people in this party to when that started to shift. The Republican Party over 10 years ago was a party that was pro-traditional marriage in the fact that they were anti-LGBTQ marriage and pro-life by providing these states, a background to be able to protect life and to protect conservative values. That has seemed to have shifted over the past couple of years to be a more inclusive party, but we were never that to begin with.
My man Rand Paul was taking Anthony Fauci to task while she was supporting the biggest vaccine salesman of all time. So if libertarian policies, the difference between libertarian policies in the modern age of the Republican Party is Rand Paul taking out Anthony Fauci and pushing him the entire time versus the man who was out there pushing Operation Warp Speed, I think that I know which side most of you would come down on there.
Of course, now we know, given the information about the vaccine that was going on, and given the time that the pandemic was going on, the president had to make a decision that he thought was the right decision at the right time. Now we know that
But you don't get credit for being right after the fact, right? You only get, you should get credit for being right before it happened.
We can discuss the vaccine at a later point. That is one of our issues. We have 35 seconds left, so if you want to wrap up your stance on federal abortion policy and statewide,
I mean, on the
then please
federal,
do
yes,
so.
on the federal side of things, I mean, it's a pipe dream to think that we'll always control the federal government. If you think that you're going to create a law, the federal government size, that's going to manage all 50 states, and that the states aren't going to do what we've done in many states, some states are going to make it legal to have an abortion before you get pregnant. Some states are going to make it illegal 50 years after, and they're going to hunt women down if they've had an abortion 50 years after, like they were working in the Auschwitz, right? But we have to allow this experimentation in order for us to determine what are the best policies.
All right, time is up. I'm going to let Shekinah respond for a little bit, but we're running over time for this topic, so I'll give you like 30 seconds.
I think that libertarians should be able to have a say-so when it comes to these federalized issues when they can win elections on the state level. I think that's the appropriate time to be able to do that.
All right,
Cool.
awesome. So you want to introduce separation of church and state?
Our second topic for today is separation of church and state. Many in American discourse believe that separation of church and state means that any religious business needs to be kept out of public affairs, such as prayer and school. Many on the right consider the separation of church and state to be misconstrued from what the Founding Fathers intended, that the state should be kept out of religious life and affairs. Some take this idea further, contending that the Founding Fathers intended for a moral and upright population, and that we should have religious elements, particularly Judeo-Christian elements, in our rule of law. Start with your opening statements about the meaning of separation in of church and state and what it means for Americans.
Well, I think the separation of church and state is it's false in the fact that people kind of assume that this is what our founding documents have, and that's just nowhere present within our founding documents. Our founding fathers intended for this country to be a moral and just country. And all of our founding fathers were Christian. They may not have been devout Catholics, they may not have been, devout sect of Christianity, they were Protestants. But I think that it's an important distinction to note that this country was founded based on a Christian Western moral framework, and that to have that and to preserve that is important. That's where you have the identity of a nation. And you have to have these things coincide with each other to have a successful nation. You have to have a moral people be in this country. You have to have a moral people abide by these laws. Because without that kind of order, there's chaos. And that's what we find ourselves in currently. There's such a lack of order. There's such a lack of respect for authority.
All right.
Separation of church and state. So the idea that church and state, should not be separate really sprang up in the 1950s when the United States was faced with a threat during the Cold War of godless communism. And that is when the United States began to put things like "In God We Trust" in our money and on government buildings and things like that. But the United States was able to pass the First Amendment to the Constitution and was actually able to bring the colonies together based on this concept of a separation. Because George Washington's letter to the Jews of the colonies, when he was speaking to the Hebrews, was saying specifically that the government of the United States would not specifically favor one religion over another, because they knew the Christians and the Jews would work together in order to be able to build a government that was peaceful to both. They didn't like Catholics very much, I'll tell you though. And it took quite some time for us to be able to integrate people of Shekinah's faith into the United States. She should thank her God for the freedom of religion and the separation of church and state here in the United States, without which she would not be able to practice her religion openly, with which she would be Abraham Lincoln's time, who were also notoriously anti-Catholic. It's separation of church and state that has protected her freedom to have her beliefs here in the United States. And I yield my time.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to go back to Shekinah on that.
Yeah, so when you have, again, the separation of church and state, there seems to only be a separation of a Christian church from the state, from the values that this country was founded on. Nowadays, as you mentioned, in the 50s, there was this Christian-Jewish coalition, but I think it's very clear in modern times, we're able to see that there is an amalgamation of all these different ways that are able to practice openly and be able to influence policy based on that too. But it seems the only time that there is pushback, that there is this iteration of a separation of church and state, is if it comes from a Christian framework. And you don't have to be Catholic to understand that. You don't have to be Catholic to see the malignment of Christians in this country, and the fact that our interests are not even being allowed. Jewish interests definitely are. Every other religion is able to have an even playing field when it comes to their interests. But when it comes to the values that this country was founded on, that has been legislated away. And I don't believe that there can be a separation of church and state, because if Christianity was even allowed to be discussed, to be pushed out of schools, then we should be able to have the same platform to be able to bring these values back into our schools and back into our society.
What is the religion of the President of the United States?
He's a Christian.
He's a Catholic. So they're not represented, they're not allowed to have their voices heard, and yet the most powerful elected office in the United States is a Catholic man. Conservatism is not something that is held merely by one political party. As a matter of fact, last night when Shekinah and I were talking about this, we were talking about the concepts of social conservatism and values, which are typically held by religious people. I asked her, what it was that really separated her from someone perhaps like Bernie Sanders or Warren, and to which she had no response. The reality is that the philosophy of the authoritarian, the philosophy of the groyper in terms of religious views, is that she really is essentially just Bernie Sanders in a pantsuit, right? Elizabeth Warren, but she goes to church on Sunday, right? There's nothing economically conservative here. There's nothing fiscally conservative here, right? Conservatism has got to be more about hating on homosexuals, or it won't stand for anything in the United States. You've got to, in terms of religious views, live in a pluralist society. Jews and Christians and atheists and Muslims, skeptics can all gather together. Now, I agree with her that the left pushes to marginalize Christianity. Of course, it depends on which version of Christianity we're talking about here, because, of course, the African American community is very largely socially conservative, and many of them, of course, are practicing Catholics or fundamentalist evangelical Christians, so very social conservatives, right? But they vote Democrat because they see the threat of authoritarianism from the right, and the Republican Party, in my view, should be doing more outreach and better outreach to those communities. What an opportunity to be a social conservative and to not be able to reach out to the black community and to bring them back to the Republican Party, which was their historic party, the party of Frederick Douglass, the party that ended slavery, the party that voted to end Jim Crow. What's changed, right? The ideas have not changed, but many of the people in the party have. But it's not that the libertarians have taken over, it's that another faction of people have taken over. It's the authoritarian faction that has caused so many in the minority community to run and hide. It doesn't look like the part of the Republican Party hundreds or the 1950s anymore. It's a very different party. And I would hope that the future of the right is a more diverse party, not just religiously, but also ideologically. Not everybody has to agree with me to be a member of a political party. Not everybody has to agree with me to be a friend, right? So to me, the idea of the separation of church and state allows for a diversity of thought and opinion, not just how your views on the Creator. Jefferson described it as God or nature's God, which offers a very wide latitude on what your views of Christianity are. Did you notice how she flinched when I asked her the question about what the religion was of our current commander, the exact same religion as her? That alone ought to tell you we need freedom of religion, because she doesn't even agree with a man who sits in office who holds her exact same religious views. And that's why we need separation of church and state.
I want to go ahead and remind my friend Austin here that this is a conversation about how to move the right wing forward.
2 minutes.
And what does that mean? Again, that being right wing means preserving a nation, and what encompasses that nation, its people, and what unites a people. What unites a people is religion, culture, shared history, and other attributes that are able to unite them under a single cause. As our country has become more globalist, has let all these people, these different religions, different racial backgrounds, different ethnic backgrounds in, we've seen more chaos and more disorder.
So was it a mistake for us to allow Catholics to serve in office, or should they be remarginalized? Because it wasn't until the 1960s that we elected a Catholic president, John F. Kennedy, if you remember. Right, so was the problem? I mean, there were a lot of people saying exactly what you were saying during the first and second and third immigration waves, because Irish Catholics were moving here to the United States, and the Know-Nothings and the KKK were trying to push your people, not just your religious people, but your ethnic people, into a position. They would love it if you would go back where you came from.
But
that's
then,
what they believe in. You're telling them the same thing?
But I'm talking about the right wing. This is a conversation about the right wing. Joe Biden and John F. Kennedy were not part of the right wing. And the way to move the right wing forward, what has made us distinct from the left, is that we actually care about these values. And this is what the Republican Party stood for up until 10 years ago. And we haven't seen any kind of progress forward trying to move more to the left. Donald Trump, with the First Step Act, with everything that he did for the African American community, got 12% of African Americans and still lost the election.
Is he a social conservative?
No, he's not a social conservative. But he was able to do a lot of things in that position to help social conservatism, most definitely.
He actually did a
Without
lot,
the,
I would argue he did a lot more for libertarians. than
without
he
the
did for conservatives.
without the appointment of those conservative Supreme Court justices, without that kind of authoritarianism, we wouldn't even have a conversation about overturning Roe versus Wade.
Appointing Supreme Court justices is authoritarianism. What planet are we on?
Well, the centralization of government, so the federal government is completely incompetent when it comes
Okay.
to ruling on stuff like
We
this.
are
but
over
when they-
time, wrap it up.
Go ahead, Shannon.
So the federal government has the power to appoint these people to make these kind of decisions, but,
Through their elected representatives. I mean, that's not authoritarian.
Right, so then-
That's liberal
so
democracy.
so arguing as a libertarian, then what's the problem with centralized government? What's the problem with a stronger centralized government? If we have a consensus that all of these states are able to have elected representatives and in turn have that kind of strong authoritative rule over the country then, if it's still being ruled upon by people
Okay.
anyway.
We are pretty over time, so I think we should move on to the next topic. We might be able to discuss this further in the Q&A session, but the next topic would be weed legalization.
Marijuana is a contentious topic for a lot of voters, particularly the young generation. While it does have medical uses that many people can acknowledge, many people are divided on how recreational marijuana should be regulated, if at all. Is marijuana good in moderation to be used recreationally? Is it destructive like other drugs? And what is its effect on society and American culture as a whole?
I think the truth is we don't really know whether it's good or not because we haven't been able to study it. And the reason we haven't been able to study it is because it's been a Schedule I drug. Now, I do believe in the decriminalization or perhaps, at worst, the legalization of all drugs. Maybe there's some arguments for antibiotics or things like that should be held back behind a doctor's prescription. But I can't say on one hand that you own your life and your body and then say that the government needs to tell you, regulate what you put in your body. And I think the pandemic was a perfect example of why we need to end the war on drugs. How many conservatives in Jefferson City, where I live, were going to the feed store and buying ivermectin horse paste because they couldn't go to their doctor and purchase legal ivermectin properly over the counter, right? One of the best conservative arguments for ending the war on drugs is that the government tried to dictate to all of us how we should treat our own illness while COVID-19 was burning up the country. Don't go down to the country store. Don't ask your doctor for ivermectin. No. The government will tell you what to do. You need to take, Donald Trump says you need to take this pill or you need to do that, or what was it that Donald Trump took when he was ill, right? So the best argument in my mind for why weed may be good, and I don't know that it is that we can study it and the scientists can distill it in a lab to determine whether or not it has medicinal effects. I think it probably does.
All right, Shekinah?
So marijuana, generally, my personal opinion, I don't think that that marijuana with recreational use is a good thing to have across the country unregulated. And the reason why I say that is, once again, the role of a government is supposed to promote the prosperity of its people and to protect their lives. Now, am I arguing that marijuana is as detrimental to a population as heroin or as fentanyl? They're not in the same category per se, but this libertarian argument that we need to decriminalize all drugs because the government shouldn't be able to regulate what you put into your, and even this idea that there's not enough studies on marijuana to study the effects, I think it's kind of laughable to me because the same argument was made about vaccines and scientists trying to know everything and legislate things of that nature, but we definitely know the effects on marijuana. And I don't believe that we should be prescribing this throughout the country for recreational use, because I believe that it's very detrimental to the people inside of this country.
All right. So how about you guys expand upon your positions a little bit more now that the rebuttal session started?
So during the pandemic, and again, perfect example, she's saying that it's the government's job to protect our lives. Well, the government determined that the best way to protect our lives was to demand that we get an experimental jab, right? In order for us to remain in the military or remain in federal employment, the government says, you're going to take this medicine. You can't take that medicine, right? So what do? We all went, Dad, you're smiling. You have to go take this medicine, right? You can't take what Donald Trump is taking and what he took in the hospital because the government knows what's best for you. Donald Trump can have access to all of these different types of medicines, and boy did he get a cocktail, and boy did he get ivermectin, and he got the doctor's prescription. He didn't have to go like the rest of us down to the farm and tractor store and buy it from the dog area and the horse area to buy the horse paste. Apple flavored horse paste is what people were going and buying. And you know what? God bless them. We don't know what the answer was, what was good for us or not. And no, she doesn't know whether or not marijuana is good or bad for you. I can tell you it's probably not a good idea to smoke anything. It's probably not a good idea to engage in recreational drug use. But I'll tell you this, some of the best works of art, in favor of recreational drug use, I'll say this, some of the best works of art, some of the best movies, some of the best of American culture has all been created. Oh, your Macintosh computer, created by a man who was inspired by LSD and other drugs that he used, Steve Jobs, right? Many of the greatest people in our society have experimented with illicit drug use and have come out better on the other side. Mushrooms, magic mushrooms, psilocybin, have now been shown to actually reduce symptoms of PTSD in soldiers who are sacrificing their lives, putting their lives on the front lines, and they go out there and they serve and they fight and they die for this country that she wants to protect. Civic nationalism, rah, 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 stand behind the flag. Send these soldiers off to die for American freedom. But if they come back all messed up and they've got a leg blown off or their arm and they've watched their buddy die, and trust me, I got plenty of veteran friends, God bless the troops and thank you for your service. I've got plenty of them that came back and they are not the same people that they were before. But some of them who have been able to have access to these drugs, these experimental drugs like psilocybin in places like Oregon, where it has been legalized and they can get access to it.
Can you wrap it
has
up and
helped.
let Shekinah speak a little bit?
Yeah, it has reduced their symptoms of PTSD. We need to legalize drugs in order to reduce these symptoms. Go ahead.
So I just find it funny that we don't trust these scientists when it comes, and I'm not pro-vaccine by any means. I wasn't pro-vaccine from the beginning, I'm not pro-vaccine now. But it's funny how we can trust these scientists with studies about marijuana that we have studies for going back at least 20, 30 years, but we can't trust them with any new developments that are occurring. So I just
Can
find
you
that
clarify?
funny.
That's a little unclear. What are you trying to say?
What you said was that we can't trust the scientists with the vaccine, that with the studies that they had at the time they had it while they were developing this vaccine.
Government
that
scientists, yes.
Right, governments. So do you not think that government scientists have also studied the effects of marijuana? What makes marijuana studies less believable, less
Since you appear to be confused, allow me to clarify, right? So we're talking about the vaccine, we're talking about studies that were done at the National Institutes of Health, the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, and others. When we talk about experimentation that's done on things like psilocybin or LSD, we're talking about things like university laboratories, we're talking about private corporations, we're talking about companies that develop these kinds of things so that they can produce medicines in a free market. When we talk about government regulations, that's an entirely different thing. When we're talking about private companies and universities, that's separate. So socialists frequently confuse the distinction between government and society, so it's a common mistake.
Any study that you see now, literally about anything, has been government funded at one point or another. And I'm also going to speak to the point that if we're somehow a freer society, if everyone in this nation has access to all of these illicit drugs. Now, I'm not going to take away from the medical benefit because that has been measured, and I'm generally pro that. But at the same time, if we were to keep going down this rabbit hole of legalizing drugs, that we're somehow a freer nation because we've allowed people to be shackled to vices. By that logic, some of the freest people in this nation are the homeless. Half of Los Angeles' population, or at least it's approaching almost half of Los Angeles' population, are the homeless, people who are, gripped by the vices of drugs. And they have safe injection sites. They have all of these things that many libertarians advocate for on the state level. Do you think that we'll live in a better nation if we have more people being able to access these brain-altering drugs like heroin and even marijuana? There have been studies that have been measured that the younger a person uses marijuana, it makes them lazy, it decreases sperm count in men. the prognosis is not good. And just because we have this cultural affirmation toward marijuana, it doesn't make it a less safe drug to use. It still needs to be regulated.
So I don't want to bore you with the details, but full decriminalization of all drugs, including hard drugs, has
About a minute left.
has been experimented with on a national level. I would highly recommend that you take a look at the studies of what's happening in Portugal right now and what they actually determined after over, I believe, a dozen years of full drug. I'm not just talking weed here, I'm talking about the good stuff. The full decriminalization of drugs in Portugal has yielded about the same amount of addiction rates. So what we find out is, what we probably should have suspected, is that a certain amount of people in society are always going to have an addicted personality and are going to gain access to these drugs. The question is, do you want harm reduction? Do you want to stop the spread of HIV/AIDS by ensuring that people who are already going to won't make too poor decisions and spread an infectious disease that will head out into the homeless
I'm gonna let
population
Shekinah
who can't afford
respond.
it? It makes it only worse for the marginalized of our society if we do not decriminalize these drugs so that they can get the treatment and the help that they need.
All right, Shekinah, you can respond. I'll give you a little bit extra time.
This comparison of the United States versus Portugal, a country that is pretty homogenous, about a third the size of our country, it's patently ridiculous to suggest that if we just implement the same policies as these countries that look nothing like us, they behave nothing like us, who don't suffer the same issues that we do, that somehow if you just transplant that over here, it's going to work out great. And it's not, and again, just that, that we live in a freer society because we're allowing more people to fall into the depths of drug use. How is that an exercise of freedom? If you're addicted to drugs, then you cannot freely be able to make any kind of
All right.
rational decision in society.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. So,
We already hinted on the topic of the COVID vaccine and COVID medical research during the last one. I think that was a really good conversation, that it expanded into multiple areas of drug legalization. So our next topic is corporate vaccine mandates. People on the right wing are against mandating vaccines. The COVID-19 vaccine is now one of the most contentious issues. Both of you believe that the federal government should not mandate the COVID-19 vaccine, but the libertarian position is that corporations have the right to ask their employees as a condition of working. Is this the right we should grant corporations? Is it the government's position to protect an individual's bodily autonomy? Would we be seeing corporate mandates without government overreach? If we had no FEMA mandate, would we still, OSHA mandate, would we still be seeing many companies deciding to mandate the vaccine?
I don't think that any American corporation should be able to mandate that that any of their American employees get this vaccine. If they're an American company, then they have to be subject to respect bodily autonomy as our Constitution lays out and as all of our founding documents lay out. Everyone has autonomy in this country, and if you're going to do business here, then you have to respect the individual. Then you have to respect the American individuals that go and work for said company. And if any corporation tries to encroach that kind of a mandate on its employees, then they should be relinquished of any kind of government aid that they might be getting and anything else, because that's a gross encroachment on our freedom.
all right.
But there was a case in the United States called typhoid Mary disease, should be allowed to walk out amongst the population. And if you are confirmed to have typhoid, am I allowed to walk, freely out into the public and cough on people, or would that be considered a felonious assault? I think most people would say, if you have typhoid, you have some kind of infectious disease, polio, or something else, you spread that to other people intentionally, that is a crime. If you spread it unintentionally, that isn't necessarily a felony, but I think most people would say, I would prefer to work in an environment where I know that the people who are in this, perhaps it's a laboratory, perhaps, would you like to know if your nurse was vaccinated for polio, right? Would you like to know that if your doctor, before he, performs a vivisection and opens you up, like if he's got a little bit of a cough, would you like to know that maybe he's had his flu shot that year, perhaps, right? Perhaps you could go to a hospital where they go out and they don't check for those things, right? In a free society, you can have something like that. As a matter of fact, there were plenty of clinics that sprung up with doctors that said that they didn't want to do this to their nurses, their staff, and they didn't want to have those mandates, and they didn't demand those mandates. I'm sorry?
Oh, wrap it up.
Okay, and they didn't have those mandates. I know a good Missouri State Senator who's a doctor who didn't require those mandates of his staff, and that's how a free society should work.
All right, Shekinah?
So of course, during the time of the pandemic, there was overwhelming evidence to suggest and actually confirm that herd immunity was the best way to move forward with COVID. And apparently, under the libertarian argument, you should have the freedom to be able to inject all kinds of drugs into your body and be in this kind of state that is not able to reason. But if you choose not to get a vaccine, to go work at your place of employment, or if you're carrying COVID and helping in that herd immunity, then you shouldn't be able to do these things because you're putting other people at risk. What's the difference between COVID and polio at that instance? They treated COVID as if it was this generation's polio. And the facts is that COVID only kills a part of the population that is vulnerable anyway to all kinds of diseases. And COVID's not unique in that. And now that we're 3 years past the pandemic, I think that this herd immunity argument even stands more true to this day.
Well, just, let's not forget that it was the libertarians who were out protesting against the mandates and protesting against the lockdowns, while the world's greatest vaccine salesman was still out pushing Operation Warp Speed, right? So let's just remember the fact that it was the libertarians who stood nearly alone in the very beginning, a very small group of us, myself included, who went to the Missouri State Capitol to stand against those mandates and against the anti-science bias that had come in, the religion of science that had taken over our country's institutions. But when we're talking about the difference between private property and government property, I think it's important that we have a respect for people's private property. And I don't want to commit the fundamental fallacy of saying that in order to understand something, you have to have gone through it, right? I can't understand what it's like to have a child. I'll never know what it's like to experience childbirth, so I'm not going to lecture women about that, right? But a doctor doesn't necessarily need to have had cancer to operate on cancer, right? But I think that this betrays the fundamental flaw in the socialist thinking in that they've never had to sign a payroll, they've never had to pay office space rent or the internet, they've never had to sign payroll taxes or FICA or Social Security, because if you ever have had an employee, or some of you ever will, and you own a business one day, you'll realize how important it is to be able to have a control in your space and your private property to be able to do business properly and legitimately. And if you are in the business of healthcare, and if you're a doctor and you're running a hospital and you're dealing with a potentially dangerous infectious disease, it might not be COVID-19 next time. The Chinese might unleash something even more terrifying and dangerous on us, who knows? Then I think it's important for private property to be respected so that people can experiment and determine what is the best policy for their workplaces. And the best thing was that people who had employers that were doing that were quitting, they were leaving, and they should have, right? You should have that opportunity to leave, right? And you shouldn't be guaranteed a job. No one can be guaranteed a job because you're demanding the fruits of someone else's labor in doing so, right? But you don't have to stay in that job. You can leave and you can work somewhere else, and a lot of people did that, and I think that that is the beauty of a free market system. The government was the problem. The mandates were the problem. The government forcing one view was the problem. But in the 50 states, places like Missouri, I'm sorry about Maryland, but in Missouri we had freedom. In Missouri we had experimentation. We had liberty. And we fought against lockdowns. I think that the county that I lived in, we only had 2 weeks of lockdowns before they reversed it because of the work of libertarians.
Okay. Go ahead, Shekinah.
Well, I want to start off by saying that the right wing was also very vocal about being anti-vaccine at the time that this was going on. I was outside the Pfizer building in New York City with Nicholas J. Fuentes, protesting the mandating of the vaccine outside the Pfizer building and outside the governor's mansion of New York City, because there were so many firefighters and EMTs that were being let go because they didn't want this vaccine. So many essential people who make our society run didn't want this vaccine.
Government
And
employees,
government employees.
right?
However, when speaking about private corporations who are also subject to American laws and to our Constitution, which does hold our own bodily autonomy, I think it's important, just like with Facebook not respecting free speech, Facebook is an American company, they should be able to allow whoever on there to say whatever they want.
So you don't think
because
that
it's stipulation.
if soldiers have to go and fight in the jungles of Africa, you don't think that the military should be able to say to its own soldiers, you're gonna get a malaria vaccine before you go and fight in the Congo?
That's completely different because COVID was a manufactured.
Gotcha. See,
Go.
this is betrays a fundamental lack of understanding of how things done. Not even understanding how the government does things, right? Let alone to dictate to the much more complex corporations out there in the government. All right, so answer the question. Should the military be able to mandate?
Joining the
Malaria vaccines.
joining the military is a voluntary thing that you do. You're not mandated to carry in the United States.
After
Like
you sign up,
see,
you are. Actually,
like-
you are. If you're a male above the age of 18, you are.
When's the last time there's been a draft, Austin? When's the last time that's happened?
Did you register for the selective service? Because I did.
I didn't, I'm a woman.
Okay, this was about corporate
What is a
vaccine
woman?
mandates, not about military ones, although I appreciate the discussion. We have a minute left, so how about you wrap it up, Shekinah? You didn't talk as much as Austin.
Right, so again, if you're an American corporation who is subject to American laws and our American Constitution, then you should know that it is helpful and that we know that studies going back several years saying that herd immunity is the best response to this. So maybe they should trust the science and just let sick people go to work because that's the way we've been doing things for hundreds of years. And that's how we've been able to build immunities for so many different diseases.
So the government and the military can mandate vaccines, but free people in their private property cannot.
Free people volunteer to join the military.
You're not free once you join the
All right,
military.
wrap it up.
Right, so again, so the government can mandate vaccines, like the military, right? Free people.
Corporations.
Do you think that the military, once somebody joins, should be allowed to
Yeah,
mandate
because
vaccines?
at that point you're a government
Is that a
employee.
yes? That's a
Because
yes?
you're a government employee.
So you do believe
But
in
as a
mandates.
free person,
So you do believe in
volunteer
mandates.
to join the military.
So she does
Let's not
believe in vaccine
pretend.
mandates.
Let's.
Okay, well, we're going to wrap up that segment, and so our last segment, and we want to leave some time for Q&A because we started a little bit late. We have to be out of here by 8:30, so I'm not going to give you as much leniency with your time.
More than ever believe that the right and left wing cannot coexist in the same country any longer. That the two ideologies have such separate values that they should be able to govern themselves. Would defederalization be a solution going forward? What about succession of individual states? What about breaking up into two separate countries? And I think part of this discussion would be the possibility of a civil war in the future. Is that a possibility that you see? So I think I'm going to who wants to start off?
So these are the original secessionists, right? Secession is always illegal, but it's not always immoral. Secession, in my view, from Great Britain, away from the crown, building the United States as an independent nation, was a secession that was illegal, but not immoral. The Confederate States, which stated explicitly in their documents the purposes of secession, was to maintain chattel slavery, secession that was illegal and also immoral. So the question is secession illegal? Always yes. Is secession immoral? Sometimes. So once you check those two boxes, you can ask yourself if it's a good idea. Then there's the question logistically, does it actually protect individual rights? Does it protect individual liberty by having more secession? More secession doesn't always necessarily protect individual liberty, as the slave-holding Confederate governments proved. So the question is now, is secession in the United States something that would protect individual liberty, advance individual liberty? And my argument is no. The reason because I do think that it would lead to a civil war, and war is the health of the state and would destroy our fundamental civil liberties. We saw what Abraham Lincoln did during the Civil War, how he crushed newspapers and
Okay.
opponents.
I'm going to let Shekinah speak now. It is her time to do the opening statement, and also this is about defederalization also, not just succession. Okay?
So I'm not an accelerationist by any means. I don't think that the civil war within the country is going to do anything good for either side that you fall on. But I believe that defederalization would not help, and that would leave the power to these states that are already maligning right-wing people and conservatism. We're already seeing these problems play out right now. If they were to go back to the states, I think that those problems would exacerbate, and I don't think that would alleviate any of the problems that we're seeing between the left and the right wing now. And again, I think the bigger problem is that the right wing in this country has no identity, because we've been bullied into thinking that having this inclusive populism is a better solution than what ground to the left wing and to libertarianism. We've been losing consistently ever since then. And I think that we need a strong centralized government full of people that think like us.
All right, awesome. Now let's move on to the rebuttal and hashing it out session.
Well, you've been bullied, you've been backed into a corner by the left, you've been backed into a corner by the libertarians. I mean, isn't your philosophy that only the strong survive? If you really have been backed into a corner, maybe it is time for your philosophy to die, right? So in terms of defederalization, the answer is yes, we need more defederalization. We need a less strong central government. We need more power allotted to the states. You should be able to vote with your feet. And we saw that happen during the pandemic. Where did all of the people who believed in freedom move during the pandemic? Florida, yes. They all moved to Florida because Florida had more libertarian policies. They didn't move to Florida because Ron DeSantis was owning Disney. They moved to Florida because they were fleeing from the terror of Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan, who said that it was to go across the street if you owned a second house, to go and cross to your other house. Right? They were fleeing from the terror of Andrew Cuomo and his touchy-feely, gropey-grabby ways. They were fleeing from Governor Gavin Newsom, who's hypocritical, was sitting on a diner without a mask and the day after they issued a COVID mandate that said no one else could go out and sit down from a diner, right? These bastions of tyranny, right, but the light of freedom stood strong in places like Missouri and Arkansas and Mississippi and Louisiana and South Carolina and Texas, where people were moving from those blue states to those red states for that freedom. Why would we want to make America a more central federalized government? You think that the conservatives, which aren't even a majority, conservatives aren't even a majority in the Republican Party. And you think that a conservative, that the United States, if governed at a federal level, will be a conservative government? When was the last time that Republicans won the popular vote? Can I ask you that? Who knows? The last time that Republicans won, yes, it was George W. Bush. That was the last time a Republican won. And you want to centralize more power in the federal government, right? If Republicans can't even win a popular vote, how well do you think you're going to do fighting things at the national level? No, that is why we need defederalization, in order for us to maintain our freedoms in our states.
Okay.
Can I get an applause, please?
Here's the fun game. Here's the fun game. When's the last time a libertarian won the popular vote on a national level?
When's the last time you won a popular vote?
When's the last time
When's the last time any of you won the popular vote?
We're talking about political strategies, being able to win elections and being able to at least get our ideology in there. And being a person that lives in reality, I understand that I have to be able to be in a party that is supposed to be right of whatever the left is. And what that means is that there are more people in the Republican Party that do think like me too. And it's much easier to infiltrate that party and to be able to get actual electable people into offices that matter, to be able to enact these laws that we care about. And that's what this is about. We need to be able to forge strategies that work and forge strategies that are based in reality. Until a libertarian gets 25% of the popular vote, then maybe I'll invite more of them to the table to be able to talk about
Okay,
this.
but can you answer the question? Do you really believe that that a conservative majority will be able to govern the federal government? That the ideas that you hold will become a majority in this country?
I absolutely do. I absolutely do, because
I
that
thought
work is
libertarians
taking.
were delusional.
Because that work is taking place right now. There's way more, Generation Z especially, they're starting to wake up to the fact that Republicans have just been bullied into submission. It's not that these
The same
ideas have ever
Generation
I'm not done
Z,
yet.
the same Generation Z that says which only 16% are proud to be Americans, recent Morning Consult poll, those 16%.
So if only 16% say they're proud to be
American, yeah.
American, what are libertarians doing to enforce nationalism? Sounds like the answer to me is that we need a more nationalist ideology in the party. Somebody is lacking.
We need a
And
more
I don't
nationalist
see
ideology,
libertarians-
but you said we need to be more like Europe.
I never said that.
You did say that.
I
last
never
time
said
when
that.
we were talking, you said we need to be more like Poland.
I said we need to be more like Poland in terms of
America
building strong
first.
families.
But Poland.
Yeah, America first means building families, and how do you do that? You have to incentivize women to be mothers. We force women into this role of, having these corporate jobs and being able to compete with men. Less people are getting married, less people are having kids.
This is the
what-
authoritarian view writ large on display. We need more women to be mothers, we need to get them out of the workplaces.
Yeah, because our nation's dying
Why-
and we don't have time
If
to
I were
turn
an
it around.
authoritarian, I might ask, why is this woman standing on this debate stage? Why isn't she barefooted pregnant at home alone? Right? She stands on the back of liberalism. She stands on the back of libertarianism that allows her to go out into the workplace, that allows her the freedom. If her ideology were put in power, she wouldn't be standing
Yeah,
here right
liberal
now.
democracy makes it impossible for people to live under one income in this country. Liberal democracy makes it impossible for
Should
people
more
to
women be in
able
the
to-
workplace?
More women should be taking care of their children.
But should more women be doing what you're doing right now?
Okay, the topic is defederalization and succession, not woman in the workplace or woman barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen, okay? So let's go back on topic.
So back to the topic at hand. I never argued that we
One
should.
minute.
I never argued that we should have more of a centralized government. I'm saying that with the system that we have currently in place, it is more realistic and it is more feasible for people like me to be able to take over a party that has historically been able to win elections and actually get this stuff done. That's what I'm arguing.
Right. So, in terms of defederalization, I think my point is made about why we need to have the states be able to make these decisions. But I do think it is an important point to say that if we need to have, more women staying home, taking care of kids, that there's, quite a big irony here with this situation. So let's leave it at that.
All right. Are you guys done?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, wow, we actually did not go overtime. Cool.
So we're gonna start on the Q&A session. We are going to ask anyone from the audience who has questions to form a line. Okay, and these are questions for the speakers, Shekinah Hollingsworth and Austin Petersen, about the stuff they presented today and the ideas that they have. All right?
So do I.
No, don't
What
say
do you want me to line them up?
Yeah, let's line them up right behind here. Okay? All right. And so we have 15 minutes for this session, so we do have to get out of here by 8:30 and respect the room and events and conference services.
All right, thanks. So I'm actually from Poland. Poland is based. So I gotta congratulate you, man. You're a master at homonyms and strawmans. Joe Biden's a Catholic. She's Catholic. Man, you're a master of fallacies. But my question is, Mayflower Compact Christian, 9 out of the 13 colonies were basically theocracies. So actually, what is the libertarian frame of morality? You say, as long as it's not the government with a B, which is 1970s boomers, the John Birch Society's been saying that for decades. You're not going to shrink the government. The America First policies put the right people in government, put people with Christian morality. What actually is the libertarian frame of mind?
The best thing that the American First, actually, Trump didn't do much for conservatives, but he did quite a lot for libertarians. He passed the First Step Act, which of course was the criminal justice reform.
And again, I don't care. See, that's the fallacy about Trump.
You asked me a question about the libertarian moral framework.
Okay, but don't go back.
But you said the libertarian moral framework, when has it been implemented?
Yeah, what is
Well,
it?
Donald Trump has implemented quite a bit. right? Teaming up with Kim Kardashian for criminal justice reform. One of the most libertarian things that
But
he
again,
did.
what is the highest?
And he also,
quality
please let me finish. Okay, we don't have much time. He also put on the most libertarian Supreme Court justice in American history, Neil Gorsuch, who has been the swing vote and the deciding factor in things like overturning Roe versus Wade. He's been making other very important libertarian decisions as well, and that was thanks to Donald Trump pushing libertarian viewpoints and policies. I think libertarians win in the courts. I think that, people are never going to vote, you're right, people are never going to vote themselves for more freedom because people are terrified and scared and they want big government to be their mommy and their daddy to take care of them from cradle to grave. Doesn't matter, Republican, Democrat, they're all progressives, right? So the only way that I think libertarians really win is by taking over the court system. And from the Supreme Court on down, many of the Supreme Court, the picks that he made on the federal level, those judges, were libertarians. For example, the Supreme Court decision that was made on Bruin, the gun rights decision, that was a libertarian decision that has allowed more lower courts, that with courts where Donald Trump has put judges on to make more libertarian decisions when it came to gun rights. And I forget the decision that was made most recently, I think it was in Texas, when it came to gun rights, there was an expansion of gun rights, but all based on libertarian means. So the court is an anti-democratic institution, right? The executive branch voted for, that's a democratic institution, right? It's not a libertarian institution. The legislature is not a libertarian institution, it's a democratic institution. But the courts are anti-democratic, and they are very fundamentally libertarian. Now, I don't have an hour and a half to explain philosophy of Ayn Rand or the economics of free market capitalism, or to sit down and talk to you about the natural rights and the concept of Thomas Paine and John Locke, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But the libertarian framework, it comes down to the question of individual rights and individual liberty. So, if you want, I can sit you down and offer you a bunch of books and things like that that you can
I
read.
know.
It would take years.
Based on what? That's my question. And you haven't answered.
Hey, my question is also for Austin.
Yeah.
So when it comes to free speech and political persecution, the biggest authoritarians we've seen haven't been the government. It's been social media giants and big corporations. I know the libertarian position, usually when I've talked to libertarians, is, make your own platform. But as we've seen from real free speech platforms like Gab, they get shut out of the Apple when hosting by Amazon. So basically being persecuted for their political beliefs as well. What's the libertarian answer to this problem?
That's a great question. Are you on Truth Social?
No.
So you're not supporting free speech by being on an alternative platform? That's not what I'm trying to
It's not a true free speech platform.
Libertarianism is dangerous to big tech, and I'll tell you why. Because if you allow the free market to work, look, big corporations don't like capitalism. They don't want free markets. For years, Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey have been lobbying for more regulation, and others won't be able to compete if they can just pass enough laws for protection for Facebook and others. But because they haven't been successful in passing those laws and regulations, what has happened? The most capitalist thing in recent American history has happened. A capitalist billionaire bought Twitter and uncovered the corruption of government. My wife was named by a senator from Maine as someone that should be banned from Twitter. So U.S. Senator Angus King came after my wife and sent her name over to Twitter and said, you need to ban this person, she's not a state troll, for doing nothing other than supporting a Liberty candidate in a race in Maine. But what was it that uncovered it? Was it the government? Was it a whistleblower within government? It was a capitalist billionaire buying Twitter that showed that the free market can actually take down. Did you read today how many thousands of layoffs Meta is planning? Do you know how many tens of thousands of people will be laid off from Meta by the end of this year? Why? Because the free market will determine who is good and who is right, and who is poor and who is broken, who is alone. And Mark Zuckerberg is on the way to the poorhouse. He's already gone down from one of the richest people in the world to like 7th or 10th. And I think Elon Musk himself even had lost, billions of dollars value. Right? When you look at things on a long enough timeline, the arc of history bends towards freedom. But you have to have freedom policies that are protected. If you have protectionism, and if you step in and you say we need to have regulation of big tech in order to protect free speech, you're going to lose out on the kinds of opportunities that we're seeing right now with Elon Musk doing the Twitter drops and being able to purchase Twitter. Remember, the FTC tried to prevent him from buying Twitter. I wouldn't have been able to know that my wife was being persecuted by the government if a capitalist billionaire had been stopped by the government from acquiring private property and buying Twitter, right?
Do you agree with the fact that Elon Musk was able to personally ban people like Kanye West, Nick Fuentes, those kind of people?
Well, here's the thing. It was unpopular for me before Elon Musk bought Twitter, because listen, I've been banned I've armed half of Missouri with machine gun, rifle giveaways. I gave away so many bump stocks before Donald Trump banned them, you wouldn't believe it, okay? But as somebody who has been persecuted, I stood and said, you know what? It is their private property. It is their platform. They should be allowed to do it if they want. But I fought back, and I used the power of democracy to write letters and emails to people at Twitter and at Facebook to get my account back, and I was able to petition for that. And that's, in many ways, that's how democracy works to an extent. Now, I will say this, in terms of now my viewpoint is popular. Now that Elon Musk, it's more popular now because Elon Musk owns Twitter, for me to defend private property rights, because we conservatives or libertarians largely agree with Elon Musk, not entirely, right? But it's certainly a lot better than it was, right? Donald Trump's back on Twitter. He's back on Facebook, right? So now I still defend their right to private property, and they're banning leftists. And now it's popular for me to support that. I still do believe that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
This question is for Austin. In the U.S. Constitution, the Founding Fathers said that we, the people, have a right to abolish a tyrannical government and replace it with a new one. At what point do you believe that the Founding Fathers would have considered a government tyrannical? And how close are we to that point?
Well, I think we got pretty damn close during COVID-19, and I'll tell you, I was willing to stand outside churches. I'm not a religious man or a praying man, but I was offering up my services to stand outside the churches to prevent the police from shutting down churches. The shot heard round the world. It was that the British were trying to confiscate their guns. In my opinion, the day that wholesale gun confiscation comes down is the day we have to start shooting. That's my opinion. That's the moment that we've crossed the threshold into tyranny. When wholesale gun confiscation occurs, that is the day of the revolution. It is unfortunate now that we have such weak leadership on the right, and Shekinah would probably agree with me on that I see so few leaders that I would gladly march into battle with, but to me, that is the sticking point. I hope it doesn't happen, and I would hope that no one else wants it to happen, but that is to me the point when it's time to start shooting.
Thank you.
Last question. All right.
I like your tie. Okay, that was the first thing.
Thank you.
Actual question. As a libertarian, what's your network?
Well, it's just kind of like with drugs, right? It's a stinking business, Mr. Rutledge, a stinking business, a dangerous business, one that's very closely tied to sex trafficking, and there are real crimes that are committed in that business. Right? But not every woman who gets $15,000 a night from her sugar daddy is being persecuted, I'll tell you that, right? But there are a lot of women who are, and there are a lot of women who are being sold into slavery. Modern day slavery is sex trafficking. And so it's one of those businesses that absolutely has to be monitored to ensure that the people who are involved with it are of their own volition and of their own accord. If someone is actually doing it of their own accord, of their own volition, then it should be allowed. I don't necessarily encourage it. I think it probably is them psychologically and emotionally, but if you're not free to make mistakes, then you're not really free at all.
Thank you for that.
All right.
Can I ask a question?
Some of
Yeah,
these guys
totally.
sit for the whole time. You guys are great. Amazing.
I guess at the beginning of this debate, you mentioned how wanting the United States to be more like Europe is a bad anti-American point of view. But for a lot of Americans, they look at Europe and how the cities are clean and safe in many places, and how in many cases you have more freedom than the United States, like you're free not to own a car and other things like that. And so is it really anti-American to want some of the good ideas from Europe and to bring them to the United States?
No, but it is anti-American to want to bring the bad ideas of Europe to the United States. And America was founded on rejecting European views of government and society. right? What was the American Revolution about? Right? It was very important for us to separate from our mother country because the colonies were entirely alien from the crown, right? King and country. It's very different from our American traditions.
I'm gonna chime in for a
Go ahead,
second.
Shekinah, yeah,
So the drug legalization of Portugal is great, but the family building policy of Poland is tyrannical and just awful. I just, see, this is the thing with libertarian ideology as a whole. I just think it's very inconsistent all the way around. And, you know, with America First policies, with America First ideology, it always puts the nation first. By any means necessary, honestly. And that makes me a socialist for wanting to put the people in this country first, the generational people in this country first, non-immigrants, not anyone else trying to assert their position over Americans. And I guess I'm a socialist now. So.
Turning Point, isn't it like your whole thing, like against socialism, fighting socialism, like the signs and things like that, right? And that just goes to show, I mean, like, again, this is the philosophy of the socialists, right? Again, Bernie Sanders in a dress, right? Elizabeth, I mean, and I think even Tucker Carlson endorsed Elizabeth Warren's economic plan here, right? What is the difference between someone like Shekinah and Bernie Sanders, right? Well, she goes to church on Sunday, and that's really the fundamental difference, right? The libertarian is unique and different because the libertarian embodies what is truly Americanism. What she's really advocating for is a Tory style of European populism, right? King and country. But America was founded by cowboys. America was founded on the great American West. Like I said earlier, gold, guns, freedom, right? Owning private property, right? Some American libertarianism grew out of the West and of the gold rush, and of the ability of ranchers to be able to set up fences in vast tracts of land. Now, you know, geographically, we're blessed far more than Europe, so we're gonna be able to have more freedoms and be able to own more land because of that, because America is such a large and great nation continentally. But let's maintain that. Let's keep that, right? That respect for private property. The socialist is a thief. The socialist is a robber. The socialist says, no, that's not your private property, that's mine. So I guess I would ask you the question that Thomas Sowell asked is, how much of what I have earned is your fair share? How much of what I work for is yours?
It's 8:30, so if you want to do some closing statements, that would be great.
Sure.
But yeah, we do have to get out of here like really soon.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'm just gonna
Yeah.
close by saying that America First is the idea that this nation is great and was really great at one point in time. And because of weak leadership and because of how weak the right wing is, it's allowed this country to descend even further than it has to. And there are a generation of young people that are ready to be able to be nationalists and be able to make this nation what it once was, great. And I'm happy to be able to represent a movement that works hard every day to be able to do that.
Thank you very much for coming here tonight, including all of our standers in the back. I hope that you enjoyed it and that some of you found something to take home tonight to mull over. I appreciate Turning Point USA for bringing us here tonight. It was a pleasure to meet Shekinah, and I'm honestly very grateful for this chance to travel to you all here tonight and to be able to share my thoughts and ideas with you. I hope some of you will stick around afterwards and chat me up for a little bit before we
Yeah,
leave.
let's give these guys a round of applause.
America, because America is free. I believe in America first, and I'm an America first libertarian Republican. I believe in the Constitution. I believe in the Republic for which it stands. I believe we are stronger if we are united, not divided. But I believe that every single individual ought to have the freedom to be able to make their own choices, to make their own determinations of what to do with their life, their liberty, and with their property. My opponent has advocated for progressivism. She has advocated for socialism, the morality of Joseph Stalin, the morality of Chairman Mao, of Fidel Castro, of those people who are on the podium by which she stands. It's quite appropriate. If you stand with me tonight, you stand with Thomas Jefferson. You stand on the shoulders of great men like Washington and Madison and Paine. I hope that you will stand with liberty in the future and that tonight I've given you a good cause of why you should stand with freedom and stand with me. Thank you. Please follow me on socials, AP4Liberty, everywhere. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. And I'd love to chat with you after the debate tonight. Thank you very much and have a great night.
You want to plug your socials?
Yeah, I've been banned from a lot of platforms because, apparently corporations can do whatever they want. They don't have to adhere to freedom of speech, but you can follow me on Instagram at she_kinda, KINDA_based.